Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's your boy, Dr. Drew. I'm bringing a video back. It's midnight, and I'm sitting in my pajamas with long hair and my glasses and being nerdy because I haven't posted a video in a while, and it's about time I posted one. I had a tuning deck, a quick draw tuning deck that I was going to post a deck profile on, but I never got around to posting it, and then I changed the deck, and I was like, why would I post a deck profile on a deck that I don't even think is good? So here's going to be a useful video that'll stay useful, and that's going to be on the different things we can, as players, can do to take advantage of, basically just to keep getting better. And I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this because I'm really trying hard to prepare for YCS Dallas. This is going to be YCS I really take seriously. So I've been all over the forums recently. I've been deck building nonstop. I've been trying all kinds of stuff. So hopefully I've got some helpful stuff for you guys today. The first thing I want to know, and the reason I'm making this video, is because right now I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh is at an interesting point in that there's really a small gap now between the expert and the amateur, and there's not quite as many amateurs as there were before, because the players that used to have trouble getting tough decks, like Teledad or Return Dad or really expensive decks, don't have that problem as much anymore because all the decks have gotten a lot cheaper. With one, the amount of decks that are out right now, which there's like 8 or 10 playable decks you could use, and two, the amount of reprints. So that letting some of the lower tier players get a top tier deck not only makes them more competitive, but it also lets them play with these decks and get better, and then gives them the hopes that they can get better, and they just keep improving. And eventually, they reach the level of the players before who used to be untouchable. I think now, especially if you go to a YCS, you can expect to play, essentially every round a top tier deck, whereas before you usually get 4 free rounds of stuff that just had no chance of topping, and that doesn't happen anymore. So now you need to really pick up your play style. You really need to be on your game to top or to do well at events, because everybody's getting better and everyone's getting better decks. The first thing to know is that you have to be there. If you're not at the point right now where you're not making good plays, where you're not able to point out and say, oh, you should have done this, this, and this, then you're behind. And if you want to be a top tier player, that's not acceptable anymore. Before, maybe you could get away with a top tier deck without being like almost perfect playstyle. You can't get away with that anymore. So first, let's talk about how you get there. There's a couple key things you need to do if you want to get there. If you're a beginner player and you're trying to get to that point where you want to be on the same thought process, the same playstyle level, the same skill level as the people that are winning the local tournaments or winning the big tournaments, you need to be able to give up the need to be right. And this is hard for people to do with their entire lives, but in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's especially, actually in your whole life, it's going to hold you back because you're never going to improve. And one of the great philosophies I think I've always heard and really like to apply to my own life is you fail your way forward. So when you're playing a game, and I misplay all the time, my biggest weakness is actually not taking games seriously enough and playing too casual and playing too fast and making tons of misplays. So I encounter this all the time. I'll be making a play, and someone will be sitting watching me and say, oh, you should have blank, blank, blanked instead of what you did because of this. And sometimes I'll say it myself too. Now when someone says that to you, when someone points out your own misplays, you have a couple ways to respond. The common response, which is the thing that holds a lot of players back, is oh, it didn't matter. Or, well, I did it because, and they come up with a reason after the fact to try and justify a play when they weren't even thinking that when they made the play. So to try and defend it with stuff they weren't even thinking about when they did it is kind of stupid. You need to be honest with yourself as to whether or not you made a mistake or not. Because if you're not, then you're never going to improve on that mistake. You're never going to fix it. So it's really an essence of you can either be right or you can get better. So instead of trying to argue when someone says, oh, you should have done this, this, and this, instead of getting hostile defensive, if you don't understand, you should say why. And a lot of people are so afraid to do that in Yu-Gi-Oh! They're so afraid to just say why. I'll find myself talking to some players, and I'll be like, oh, well, Effect Failure is great against this deck because of this, or something like that, and I won't go into huge detail on it. And I'll look at their eyes, and they'll just sort of glaze over, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's true. When they should be asking why. Why is that? You can't be afraid to look bad, because you're never going to improve. And I'm actually, usually really impressed with players if I say something like that, and they're like, why? Because I know they're going to improve, and, that's the only way you're going to become a top-tier player. So when someone points out your misplays, don't get defensive, don't get upset. Acknowledge, you need to be realistic. You're going to misplay. Everyone misplays. Take it as an opportunity to improve. The next thing is that the ability to memorize and think about your plays versus going into autopilot. Now, autopilot's another huge factor as to what separates good players from bad players, because it's real easy in Yu-Gi-Oh! To just look at the card, know what it does, and play it. And there's different, there's different like levels of where you can be at with how much autopilot you go into, but pretty much any level of autopilot's a problem. If you're not thinking about what your opponent has on the field, what they have set, and what their possible responses to your play is going to be, you're already losing. It helps a lot to memorize really complicated plays, even though you should still think through them when you're playing through them. And this is why playtesting with a deck for a long period of time is helpful. That way, if you get into a tournament setting, you don't take 3 minutes to think through a 1-for-1, Reborn, Lone Fire play or whatever. So you should, on some level, memorize plays, but when you get to, you really need to think through your plays as you're playing through them. Now, you memorize the easy ones and then you think through the complicated ones. But if you're not memorizing plays and you're not thinking through plays and you're just going to autopilot and just putting cards on the field, you're losing. So if you can stop those two things, the autopilot and stopping the need to be right, you're going to improve really quickly. And lastly, you really need to bite the bullet on just not playing those funky cards. Like, sometimes you want to be creative, and you should be creative because you're going to get an advantage on your opponents. But if you're not at a point where you can deck build that your creativity is helping you, then you can't be creative yet. You need to get enough experience with the game to where your creativity actually helps you and gives you an edge on your opponent. So if you're playing cards in your deck that are subpar, if you're playing Samurais and you're playing things like actually, Samurais is a bad example. No one plays Samurais yet. If you're playing plants and you're still playing subpar cards like Copy Plant, which I'm sorry for those of you who do play Copy Plant, but it's a subpar card. If you're making mistakes like that, if your builds are weaker than the ones that are topping, and you should know because you should be playing with those first and adapting those into something that you want to use. Building decks from scratch is pretty fruitless most of the time. Especially if you're trying to improve, you just don't have time for that. You get to that once you're at a point where you're at a high level of skill and you're not misplaying, then you can go ahead and mess around and try and build creative decks and try and win in that sense. But if you're not there yet, don't waste your time. A lot of times this format, I'm playing standard because I'm not going to waste too much. I've tried a little bit trying to build new decks, new ideas, and I'm realizing that I can't beat what's already standard right now. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't, and right now I can't. I need to accept that and swallow my ego and just play the standard and do what I can to with my other skills to improve on that. And now I'm going to make another video for those of you who are already at that level, who are already, when you sit down and play, you're going to be better than the majority of the people you play at locals. You're going to make the better play. You're going to make the better reads. And there's a lot of you guys out there. I'm going to make another video right after that to talk to you guys. But this video was aimed more at the beginners and the guys who are trying to improve just to get to the level of basically being a regional topper. Now, I'm not any YCS topper, but I'm definitely coming up with some strategies for the next tournament as to what I think are going to help me YCS top. So I think they'll help you. And so tune in for the next video coming up in like 10 seconds or as soon as you click the link. That's it for me for this video. Dr. Drew signing out.